Hey guys, what's going on? So we're going to continue with the video, and yeah, so we'll see how that goes. And yeah, so we're going to continue with the GBP pairs. So what we can see over here is on GBP Aussie, if we go down to the daily, it's quite an interesting one because it has been declining, so we are waiting for entries. There wasn't a lot of entries on the way down, which I think as well is something in itself where it happens. It's just one of those things where sometimes we get a sell-off and we don't get clear entry points, but eventually they do start to formulate. So what we are waiting for now is clear continuation. So maybe perhaps we get something in the lines of this and it comes back up and then it creates continuation here, and then we get a sell sequence to the downside. I am looking for something like this where we get a decent sequence like this. At the end of the day, you know, we don't know for certain. We could get continuation further down below, but if we do come back and revisit those areas there, that would be quite interesting for a continuation to then take advantage of the sequence on this side. I think at the end of the day, it is selling off, so if it does go and it continues and creates continuation down here, it's still pretty good. We just take advantage of something in line with that, and then we can play the larger move to the downside, which is good. Obviously we can see that on the daily, so if we go down to the 4 hour, we can see our price is developing. It is corrective on the way down, so this is giving us a good sign that potentially we could be seeing either two things, where price then starts to make its way back up, and it makes its way back up to those areas there. And what would be nice is if we did reach it with a bit of structure as well. That would be quite interesting, because then at least we can then get a more precise entry on there, which I think would be quite good. Where if in the lines of something like that, with a large enough stop loss to protect, we can manage that into low for about almost 3%, or depending on how tight we get, and then we can potentially play that to further down to the downside. In the case of a scenario where we do go long, it would just basically be where we invalidate this trade thesis, and it'd basically be in the same area of where we're waiting. So we'll get a clear message from the market. Essentially what we'll be seeing is, you know, price makes its way back up here, and then when it gets to those areas, we'll get a clear message from the market. If we get something in the lines of this, that's a clear enough message from the market that we are not selling off and we're coming back up and we're responding to that low, and then we can take advantage of something like that. I am more favourable for for the short, but you know, we can't completely write off the long because there is still that potential there. GBP CAD, a similar situation where we have this all-time high. We did reach it with this section here, and then we had the override where price tapped in there and sold off. But what we can see here is price is failing to show commitment to the downside. So what we might see is price then makes its way back up now and comes up here, breaks above, and then it's either two things. We either see further continuation to continue higher, or what I am hoping to see is we get a pushback down and then we get continuation, and then we get a clear enough sequence to continue to the downside, and we can take advantage of that overall move. And I think that would be quite interesting to see. So again, needs a bit of development, but it's shaping up, it's getting there. It's on the 4 hour, you know, this can get there by, you know, end of this week. It could be up in these areas, and then we just have to wait patiently to see if we start consolidating in these areas to go long, or if we start rejecting and coming back down, we can start to look to get short. And I think that's a very clear and interesting play in itself. So a bit of patience there. GBP Swiss, to be honest, it is a little bit corrective. We do have a low right here, and at the same time we do have that gap. Even though we've also just near missed that little low there, I think knowing that this is a bit of a corrective pair, this could still sort of formulate to be a bit more corrective, tap into an area in these areas here, respond, make its way back down, and then what we tend to see is some sort of corrective channel onto the way down, and it just continues squeezing and then eventually starts to make its way potentially back up, or just continues further. I'm not really a big fan of this particular pair, GBP Swiss. I think I would really be more inclined to see continuation below to continue, or if we do start moving back up for whatever reason, then, you know, a clear sequence where we've tapped into either one of these key value areas, and then we can get that continuation to play that overall there. So that's basically it. GBP New Zealand. Apologies about the dog. So what we're seeing here on GBP New Zealand on the weekly, we can see that price is still moving to the upside with momentum. There isn't any clear sign of price pretty much exhausting just yet. It's moving within a squeeze, so we have a value area just there, and then we also have a little hook point there, which I'm not putting too much weight on, but could see some form of a reaction. What I do want to see here is that how does price really actually approach this area here? So right now we are kind of within somewhat of a range within this whole area here. Haven't really established a bottom or a top just yet, so we do need to wait and see. But for whatever reason, if we do come here and just near miss it and start to make our way back down, and we create some level of a base in one of these areas, then we could potentially see a reaction where price then makes its way back up. And then if we get larger structure just below that, we could take advantage of something like this to then go long. And I think that'd be more than enough weight for us to see that. But seeing how price is really approaching it and squeezing, I don't think that's the likely scenario. I think we're going to continue within this squeeze, and price might just continue squeezing for some time before we end up seeing any sort of shorting momentum. So I'd be a little bit patient with GBP New Zealand. It's not the most prepared pair as well. That's on the weekly. So if we did go down to the 4 hour, we could make argument for continuations to go long, but at the same time, as we know we're in a squeeze, we could get these sort of erratic sort of movements where price sells off and comes back up and sells off. So what I would really base it on now, if you are looking at GBP New Zealand, is I would mark on that high there, and I would see how I can actually get trades into that. So I would be evaluating price a little bit carefully, understanding that we are basically trading into this area here, but we're so close to that. I would more so be interested in not something so small like this, but if this did sell off, comes up a bit, and then starts creating, you know, a bit more for base and trades into something like that, then I could potentially look at that as the area, wait for an insurance entry, and then take this for the long. And I would be inclined to look at that, because then we're clearly trading into something here, which would be interesting. But at the same time, like I said, it's not really the most preferred one. I think there's a lot of better pairs on watch, but for GBP New Zealand, I think that's pretty much the game plan. And then looking at GBP Yen, I think covering Aussie Yen, CAD Yen, Swiss Yen, we can see that, you know, the shorts are definitely looking pretty interesting. What I do like about this is that we are coming into an area where we have a bit of a base here. So I do want to see if we can respond to this and see if we can go long. It's just the way that we're approaching it is pretty impulsive, and there's a bit of momentum in there. So at the moment, it's not really the best of areas to be looking for a risk entry. So I wouldn't be taking an entry right there. What I would be doing right now is I would be waiting patiently to just see how price responds. So I'll go to the 4 hour after we get a bit of a daily signal. So I would want to see something like price comes in, breaks below here, and then eventually pushes its way back up and gives us something like this to then start making our way back up, which then negates the idea of any sort of short continuations. If we did start to stall in these areas and create something a bit like this, then, you know, we have to be on two sides of it, because we are trading within this low inflection area here. But more so, if this starts to formulate like that, I don't see why we wouldn't want to look for a short, but I think it'll be more of an insurance entry play for me personally. May not get it, may get it, who knows. But at the same time, that could easily form into something failed, and then we still move up higher, and then it's off that where we get our clear message from the market that this isn't the continuation to the downside. This is now a reversal to play to the upside. So again, needs a bit of time to develop. Need to wait and see. It could develop a bit quicker as well, because we're so close. But I do want to see that daily confirmation, so I will be waiting for the daily before looking on any time frame. I want to see how we've basically even smashed through this a little bit, wicked through it, closed, given us a pretty decent pin bar, heavy bodied or whatever it is, and then we start to see those candles moving to the upside, and then we can take advantage of that. So that one will come on watch very soon, just need to wait patiently for it. GBP US dollar, I think out of the GBP pairs, This one certainly does have a good level of potential in line with the DXY. I just think that with this low in mind here, we do need to be a little bit more on the cautious side, because this could be something a lot larger than what it seems. So we could be in a quite a decent corrective phase, even though if you are zoomed in, you're probably looking at something like this, where price is now pushed up. We've got a bit of a corrective middle section here, but I don't think this is where we have a huge advantage just yet. I think if we are going to be taking something, you know, an insurance entry, I think I mentioned this previously, it looks very similar to Euro USD, where if we do get something in the signs of broken above this now, and we get clear continuation here, then at least I can manage it into that point there. From here, I'll try get a risk entry on that personally, and then try trade that into this area, and then if we do end up moving higher, we can then take it into those areas there. So that would be the idea there. But I think looking at this, I'm not really too keen on it, because we can still tap into this area here with momentum, and then from there we could literally see it sell off, and then it starts making its way back down, and then, you know, it just starts moving and then starts filling to those bottom areas there. So I would be a little bit more on the cautious side when taking a trade on this, because it's a little bit in a neutral zone. So I would be looking at the DXY for a clear trading idea. I don't know if we will, it doesn't seem right now like we'll get that continuation, because it is accumulating within this. So this could just pretty much move and make its way to, you know, this area, or even that little bit of liquidity there. And then after we've kind of tapped into there, we'll get a clear message from the market. And if we get something like that, 100%, I'll be looking to get short on that, because, you know, even with a risk reward on that, I'm almost certain I could probably get about 10 pips. Even if I win 15, not really an issue. Risk entry, reduce risk entry, and then even managing it backhand down to the downside, you know, you've got almost 11, 12 to 1. So that's a pretty decent trade in itself for a trade idea. So I'm for the long or the short, but I think the short would be a lot nicer if it did come into play. If we look at New Zealand CAD, what I do like a lot about New Zealand CAD is, even though it's very corrective and it's not really your typical trading pair, what we can see here is that if we box range this off, we have the low here, call that the high, and then within there we basically move down correctively here. But then we had the structure like this, and it seems like we're pretty much moving into another correction, and it's just being a very corrective move. But I think once we tap into those areas, this could be your middle section for this to potentially make its way back up and then potentially move even higher. We have to understand that we are within this overall corrective channel here. So for that being, you know, one scenario that we may not see a trade for a while, that's completely fine, because we are on the weekly, but we can take advantage of shorts, because we can see that there's a lot of reasons for us to look for the shorts. So then when you look on the daily, you can see that, you know, we mark on these areas and we just see how we respond. And if we get continuation here, we can then take advantage of that, play that to the downside, and then there's a clear run there. Of course, you know, this has been corrective, so even if this does go, it could still hover around for some time before it even makes its way there. So then you have to understand that if you're taking a trade here, that is the potential, that this is the trading environment right now. So you could sit in this trade for a few months before seeing a large turnaround. So I wouldn't be looking to get involved in the daily. I would be looking to get refined a little bit on the 4 hour and so forth. Wait for that structure to develop. And then once that structure is developed, you can then take advantage of that. And I think there's definitely some potential on this particular pair, because if you do get in on a refined entry, for example, let's say we mark up, you know, this is the area here, and price does make its way back up pretty aggressively as it seems right now, and it taps in here, and then we do get a rejection and a continuation here. Even with trading it into that particular first low there, what we can see is if we put on that risk reward tool and we get involved in here, even with around about 20 pips, not the most preferred, but 20 pips, you know, you still got a 3 to 1 into that low, so you can still walk away with something before that develops into something further. And yeah, it's pretty decent. I mean, I'm really for that. And then if that does sell off for whatever reason, you know, you got about 10 to 1, 12 to 1 to the side. So still pretty decent trade on the board there. New Zealand Swiss, again, It's quite corrective. It's on its way down. It does respect structure though, which is nice. It doesn't always give you the best entries, but as you can see here on the daily, you know, it's in terms of pattern separation. What do you have here? You have this continuation here. It then broke. You had the low down here, then created another one there, and then came back, retested it with another continuation there, and sold off and eventually came. So there was multiple ways that you could have got involved on this as well. And you know, you tend to see this time and time again that price will come back and retest those areas, you know, where it broke, and then it will create continuation, sell off, came back, failed to continue higher, sell off, continuation, sell off, continuation, and then eventually taps into those areas. Wouldn't be surprised if we, you know, we start making our way back up now, and then we start to see price. But again, I'm not always favorable for longs on these Swiss pairs. I think the shorts are definitely much nicer because it has been selling off on the higher time frame for quite some time, so we can see that it does commit. Even on the weekly, you can see the exact same thought process. You know, over here you can see where price had this, tapped into the value there, then responded, had a small continuation there where it broke, it retested it. Even after it broke the low, came back, retested that. Let me just check if that's 50%. So yeah, 50% of the structure, yeah, borderline. Came back, retested that. Even if I measure it to the low, it's hovering just around it there, and just continues. So I mean, again, it is another pair that you can trade. It's just not the go-to trade trading pair for me. Weekly, I do like New Zealand US dollar in line with the other dollar pairs. I think right now, if I go to the weekly, you can see here we've basically done more than enough in the sense of tapping into that low. Or have we actually? Let me just double check that. Yeah, arguably there is a near miss here. We did take up this high, but it's just not really giving us that real commitment. So what I think is likely is we might probably just sell off and come back down into these areas, and then once we're down here, we'll probably start failing to commit, and then maybe make our way back up, which will be interesting. And then we can take advantage of the continuations on the way back up. The only thing that I don't really like about this is this, again, if you look at the trading environment of this, we are within a squeeze. So until we're trading it back up into these areas here, we don't really have a trend change. We are squeezing, but what we do have here is we do have a 1, 2, 3 into those areas there. So, and it's at the break. So what we would see is either we break and continue, or we don't continue and we start reversing, and then we leave another gap in the market, which is possible. Obviously, when you do look at it from the higher time frame, you know, you can see that price is within a larger range here, and it has been corrective on the way down. But knowing that, you know, right now the short bias is definitely one to consider, we can then go back down to the daily and we can see how price is responding, and we can see here that we essentially had this low on here. This was going to potentially be the structure. We failed to commit. We responded to that high there. We then sold off, and now we've broken the low. If we get further continuation here, it doesn't mean that it's wrong, because, you know, we are still within that, but this could just continue and sell off and then eventually make its way down. So again, DXY dependent. I do want to see how this formulates. If we get continuation to the downside, that would be great. Right now, this is a little bit large, because what we can see here is we have a near miss to that low. We have this larger sort of expanding correction, which didn't really feel that. And then it went back into a larger correction, which is becoming very much overextended. So that's why I wouldn't be surprised if we do get clear shorts. So I would like to see if, you know, we start developing something in the signs of this, and then we get that nice little flat continuation after this corrective squeeze. Then we get something like that, and then we can take advantage of that with stops above and then trade that into the low. So let me just check that in terms of a risk reward. Let's say that we get this, and then even with the washout, let's say we can crop that even with 40 pips, you know, measuring that to the downside on the daily, you know, we're still looking at about 8-1. Now if we go down to the 4 hour, it would be a pretty large structure and it could take time to develop. But as we've seen with the other related pairs, you know, it seems like they do all need a little bit of time for them to develop. So I wouldn't really be rushing into anything just yet, because it seems like you could get caught out into a corrective squeeze sideways price action. So I'm not going to be looking to jump into anything just yet, but keeping it very simple, what I will be doing is just marking on where the area of interest is, pretty much just around here, or even to retest that. I would wait for a clear 3 touch personally. I'm not going to be taking any sort of V shapes. So I'm going to be waiting to see how that develops, and just to kind of draw that out properly. Let's say that near misses, which will be good as well. Comes down, creates a bit more for base, comes back up. And then even if we got something like that where, you know, we could make out a 1, 2, 3 with it, whatever, that would still be solid price action. Even coming off the back of retesting that, I could get in there with a more precise entry, even on the 4 hour. But I would like to see, even if I got that, if there was an insurance entry, and then to the bottom of that structure, 3 to 1. And then if it does end up following through and then starts being impulsive or whatever, you know, again, you got another 12 to 1. So I think this is a prime example of, if you're going to be patient, this is what you want to be patient for, something like that, because that's going to form profitable and give you pretty high risk reward, precise entry, good protection, because it's done more than enough for, in terms of accumulation and repetitive price action. So you can take full advantage of that. Next one I'm going to be looking at over here is New Zealand yen. So if I go down to the weekly, obviously we know with the yen pairs that they are selling off, but nothing is certain until, you know, we start really moving with momentum out of these invalidation of it potentially forming something else. I do think that this sell-off isn't really the best. The reason being is because it's not really come from anywhere majorly significant, and it is in trend, but at the same time it's basically created a base here. We've tapped into the base, then we moved correctively, and this seems a bit more for like a liquidity grab. So it seems like it's coming down to just tap into some liquidity, and I think the likelihood is this is a key area there as well. But also where we are right now is quite an interesting area in itself, because, you know, we've previously had price tap in there, scoop up, didn't really feel the whole wick there, came back down, and it's now broken that low, which is interesting. But at the same time, it's not really showing any signs of exhaustion just yet on the daily. So I wouldn't be looking to jump into anything just yet, but I would be waiting for more of a developed flag. So I'll be marking on this here. And what I would want to see is, I would want to see some development now of a continuation, something to just finalize this move. And maybe if we got something in the lines of this would be great. You know, this would be solid. I don't know if we'll get that, but if we did get that, that will give it enough momentum for us to then take advantage of this overall run to the downside. And then potentially in these areas here where it starts to correct and get a bit messy, the approach might even be a bit slower than we anticipate. So what we might see is price then starts to do something like that and just starts to channel into it, and then eventually just moves, sells off a bit, profit taking, and then eventually makes its way back up. So I wouldn't be rushing into anything just yet, because if you do go back to the daily and you look at it, the positioning of it isn't at its best, to be honest. You know, with this in mind, where it's basically tapped into those lows, it's basically not really got a huge amount of reason to come back down, because it's done what it needs to. So I think right now it could just be a bit of profit taking and getting better positioning for a bigger move. So I just want to be waiting to see when that confirmation comes in. So I want to see if either we come into these areas here, however we come into it, and then if we respond. What would actually be quite nice is if we do come in there and we do something like this where we look like we're going to continue, and then we fail, and then we get that small consolidation here just outside of whatever this was, and then we start making our move back up. That would be pretty solid, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if I saw something like that, because then you'd be able to understand that, okay, well, we have a gap here to this high here, and then we have that high above. So we could be coming to fill this, and then at that point there, it then consolidates and continues, and the next thing you know, we're all the way making our way back up here. So there could be an extremely nice bullish run involved. I think, again, it's one of them ones where you want to be a bit patient with it, and you don't want to just jump into anything, especially because we're just sitting in these areas here now. It's nowhere anywhere as significant as a key value area. So let's just wait. The market will give us a message. That's the nice thing about it. You know, we will see the momentum come in the market. Most likely what we'll see is price sells off, even if it doesn't go to that low, but we'll see the big candles fall in, and then we'll get them corrections that we're looking for, and then we can get involved in something like that. It may not be clean, it may be a little bit messy, so you'd have to read through the price action, because again, I'm on the daily right now, but if I just drop over to the 4 hour, and if we look at a bit of pattern separation, what did we have when we tapped into this low here? Well, when price came back up, it basically had this, which then failed, and then we had that little bit of price action there, where you would have then looked to get position on that, potentially taking a break even, but even so, you can see then price just pretty much went corrective sideways, and to me that's not really a great sign of showing full commitment. It's actually looking like it's kind of coming back round like this as well. So I would also be on the cautious side of just looking at the longs, because even though, you know, we have that in mind, the sell-off is still possible. You know, we can still continue just making our way back down. So again, it's not like that is going to be the scenario. It's just keeping that neutral mind and looking at both sides of the potential, and then understanding where and when you're going to pivot. But I think, you know, this area now and this area here are two key areas where I want to see if both of them get invalidated and price smashes through it and then starts to create some larger correction, I'll get a clear message from the market. But it's unlikely that we get this large sell and then we get this and then it just continues. I don't think that's the most likely scenario. I think, you know, seeing how price has been moving here, where it's basically been corrective like that, it's come back up and then it's sharply come back down, tapped into these areas. It's not really my typical price action. So again, it's not the one that I would take a trade in here and be like, yep, that's going all the way down there. Like, I wouldn't have that at all. If I took a trade in here, I would see if I can at least manage it into there, but be aggressive with it. And then when we get into those areas, see what price does. If it starts to develop further down here, fine, fair enough, that could develop and become something a little bit larger. Because if you look at this overall leg here, we would need something in similar weight to then give it enough room to continue to the downside. And again, you can see that would need a lot of time to develop. So that's something that I will bear in mind. Not always the case. Sometimes it can be a bit of a momentum run and we don't see that. And, you know, we get these massive sell-offs, but, you know, I'm not going to be basing my trade thesis on a massive sell-off like that, because that's not your typical price action. And then to finalize the currency pairs from the previous two videos, so this is part 3, of course, I'll just get through the US dollar pairs and then hopefully make a separate video on indices, and then do commodities, and then potentially do some cryptos. So what I do like about USD CAD inline, I'll just go over the DXY one more time as a refresher. And what we can see here on the DXY is we are within this range. So if I just clear that off and clear this off, what we can see here is price is basically channeling within this range here. And this is not really an area where we have a major edge. So yeah, so what basically got here is price is within this range. So right now it can go either way, to be honest. It can develop and become something a bit larger, creates this as the base, whatever it does, that becomes the middle section, this whole section here, and then it continues moving. Again, it's, if you look left, it's not really the best area as well, because we've got all of this sitting here, so there's a lot of buys and sells in these areas. We just want to really clear this area. I think if we clear this area and we're back up here and we get continuation, I wouldn't be against it. I think that would be a very solid trade, because we basically cleared all of this and the trade thesis for any sort of reversal. But then at the same time, if I go down to the 4 hour and I'm trying to isolate something in here, I can see that price is clearly responding to these areas here, and we're now potentially seeing price move to the downside. So what I would like to see here is if this does form some level of a continuation, then we could see that on the related pairs, on the USD pairs, and we could potentially see that for a short. So then if I go down to USD CAD and I'm looking at it closely here, I'm like, what reason does it have to go short? Well, it doesn't have a huge amount of a reason just yet, because you've still got that high up here. In some ways you could argue, you know, you've got this and then there's a bit of an override here. So what if, you know, what if we respond to this and we go short? I think that's a possibility, but at the same time, it's like, well, you're still trading against that gap. So keeping that in mind, we've still got the high to the left up here. We've got the gap here. This can still develop into a lot of things. So even if you took a short here for whatever reason, right, this can still come back up, do that, and then eventually make its way. And I think the long is a much nicer play. So then if I just go back to the DXY for a second and we have a look at that, you can then see here that, okay, that could potentially still make its way up. So if it does that and starts to correct and make its way back up, would you really be surprised? Not really, because then it still becomes a part of this. It could still be, and I don't think I would be taking that as the reversal in itself, but we bear in mind that, you know, this can still evolve into many different things. And I think when you're getting into an area where you have that, it's a bit more of a trade idea that comes with a bit more risk. So if you want to mitigate against that risk and really get the confirmation of what this is, you know, what we would really want to look for, and I think it's quite obvious, is a break of that low and continuation down here. And I think if you got something like that, which again you'd have to wait for, that would be a lot nicer, to be honest, because we've invalidated the idea for this being a long. And at this point here, it's either you get a clear confirmation candle here to go short, and that fails, and then you get small consolidation, and then you can take advantage of that and then just pivot and go long. And that's the nice thing about taking a trade like this, because you understand that because of that gap up here, there's the possibility that if this shapes up, that's going to be very high probability, and you'll take the trade from there, and you'll probably be able to take it there and get a pretty decent risk reward. If I just mark on the risk reward on that, you know what we're looking at, let's say you're looking at roughly, you know, what, for argument's sake, let's just say we go with 20 pips. Even with 20 pips up until this point here, you're looking at around about almost 6%, which is decent. And then on the side of it going short, you know, and you get the trade in that part there, just below, and let's say you even put it below for whatever reason there, with 18, 20 pips, you're still looking at 8 to 1 into that low. So you can see on both sides, even if you were to take the loss here and then catch into that one, you'd still be in a 6 to 1. So you'd walk away with, you know, at minimum 3 to 4%, which is good. So I would bear that in mind. And then I think the same applies for USD Swiss. Right now we can't read, we have more reason to go long than short, but if we mark that on as the low and we see where price is, well, in terms of the value area, we've tapped into the low, we've pushed away with momentum. If I just invert this for a second, it kind of has a bit of that head and shoulders feel as well. If you're not familiar with a head and shoulders, it's basically where you have left shoulder, right shoulder, the head, and then you can see that it's basically like that, and that's basically what we call the head and shoulders. So in this case, because we've inverted the chart, it's an inverse head and shoulders, but it's still head and shoulders. So what I'm seeing here is that we've kind of responded to that, and it's a bit slant as well, which is not an issue. What we're then seeing over here is that this is a bit of a squeeze and can potentially just sell off. So I would probably look at USD Swiss in its own merit, just for the reasoning of this price action. But again, you know, I'm not going to cancel off the board that we are within this squeeze as well. Being in that, you know, I really want to see something a bit more. I would want to see a real break of that low and continuation down here, and then at least I can manage it into that first point, and then accordingly. And I think that would then have confirmed this price action here. It would have given me the liquidity that I need in that area there. I can manage it into that point, and then if it further follows through, I can then manage it there, and that turns into a pretty decent trade. And then this becomes one large piece of its own to then evaluate that separately at a different time. So that would basically be how I would be looking at USD Swiss. Bear in mind, this is an inverted chart right now. So I'll invert that back. And yeah, you can basically see what I'm looking at there. So last but not least, we have USD Yen. USD Yen did have a few good entries, but they came in through Asian session for London time. So if you basically were looking at this, at first. Obviously, yeah, there is a gap up there as well, but it was quite far away. Where the clue was is after we had that strong push, we then met with that low with a continuation. We then broke it and then had another continuation as well, which again, you know, they weren't the best trades. I mean, it would have been nice if this was a little bit more developed. We had something like that, and then that continued, and then we had something in that size. That would have been great. Or even if this did the same and did that, that would have been perfect. But we didn't get that. We went for Asian session and it's just selling off. So then you treat it on its own merit because it has its own mind. What we can see then is if we mark on the low here, we did wick to it, but it seems like we are coming down with momentum at this point, giving that enough room. Now we are in the middle of structure, so I would want to be seeing something a little bit more defined. And I think what we were talking about just now, where we could wait for those clear structures whilst it develops, and then if we get something like that, I think that would be solid. And then what we would have there is potentially even a retest. I mean, I wouldn't mark that off completely, but I'd basically be looking at it like this, and then potentially if we had a 1, 2, 3 in there, something like that, and we could take the short. That would be beyond perfect, because then we could get in with a precise entry. And yeah, even if you went in to cover that for whatever reason, you'd still walk away with 3.5, a bit more precision. You could probably get in there, probably get even insurance entry usually, AFT. So, you know, probably get in with around about a 5, 6 to 1, which is good. And then, you know, if you get these added bonuses, you can get even more aggressive if you get something like that in there, and then so forth. So I will be waiting patiently for this one. I would like to see how that develops. If we get something clear as day, that would be great. If not, then it is what it is. But again, we can't really predict all of the patterns that will shape up. We can just trade what we get. And looking at how price is moving in that momentum, we may not get something that clear. We might get something very similar to what we saw there, and it just continues, and it's a little bit more, it could be similar to this, but just a bit smaller, and gets there a lot quicker. Especially if we look at some news. What do we have? Well, we have some ISM news. Yeah, I mean, again, we're in that area now where we're in the middle of structure. Price can do two things. For whatever reason, if the US dollar gets power and it starts pushing up, it's all the way back up here. And then you could wait for potentially a trade here to then trade it into that low to potentially that becomes a middle section and becomes something a bit more defined. And then it moves to the downside. Who knows? You know, there could be many trades within this where we just have to wait and see now what happens. So we can't assume that the trade will be down there. It could shape up and be a lot larger, and we could be using that as liquidity to then build this, and then we get that to get the momentum of phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 into that area, break the low, come back in, and then we're long again. So multiple ways we could be looking at this. It could develop. We just have to wait patiently to see how this structure formulates. And then in line with how price is moving, where we've had this, we could get something smaller in here as well. And then it goes, and then that's the third one. And then it just goes, right? Those things do happen. So that's basically the outlook on all of the currency pairs. And yeah, I'll jump into the commodities and indices in the next videos, so we can go through those. And then, yeah, we can go with that. Maybe I'll even go through stocks, who knows? But yeah, I'll catch you guys in the next one.